It wasn't saying that you can't do solar generation facilities. It was simply stating that local jurisdictions have a right to establish the parameters and the regulatory structure of this development to ensure that people's private property is not trespassed or infringed upon. So again, it was a local autonomy, local authority bill. I know how you feel about all this solar generation development, Danielle, but even assuming for a second that it is something that would be efficacious and that would actually provide an appreciable source of energy. Let's just assume that for a second. The bill simply said you can do it, but local authorities will establish the parameters, the permitting, and the regulatory structure of this development. Once again, Republicans, the historical principles of our party is local authority to the maximum degree possible. This bill, and this is one that will stick in my craw until 50 years from now, maybe I'll forget it, that this failed on the House floor in a 53 to 46 vote because of Republicans. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us once again on the State of Freedom.
Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us on the State of Freedom. It's good to be back at the 10 a.m. time slot. I'm Danielle, your host with my brilliant co-host, Chris Alexander. We're thrilled to be with you. We're thrilled that session is over and the air has started to clear somewhat from all of the political pollutants in Baton Rouge. We're here for the start of the readout of what happened, and we'll be talking about who the proponents and killers were of good and bad legislation. We're thinking it's going to be a 4-part recap because there was so much that happened that requires a faithful reporting, and you deserve to know how your representatives and senators voted. So we will be bringing it to you, the unvarnished truth, per usual. Before we get into the spicy news of today, let me read the scripture of the day. It's Luke chapter 4, verses 16 through 19. And it says, "You are set free. I've come to share the message of the Jubilee, for the time of God's great acceptance has begun." And we can see throughout the Gospels that Jesus did fulfill all of this scripture that he read in the temple that day. And as followers of Jesus, we are commissioned and we carry his anointing to do the same, to bring his hope for the poor, to bring his healing to the brokenhearted, to bring his gift of understanding to those who can't see the truth, and to preach his message of freedom to those who are prisoners to their sin. And just as Jesus did, we have access to, and he expects us to bring both the spiritual healing and the physical healing. And we do that by faith and by his guidance. And we may not have it all figured out, and we may not exactly see the results in the way that we hope or expect, but we are commanded to do it. And I can tell you one thing, we'll never see it happen if we don't step out in faith and try. So this is a time when we should be pressing in to see more of God's miracle working power in us and through us. It never stopped being available. His healing power, his miracles never stopped being available. I think that just as a body of believers at some point after the early church, we stopped practicing and knowing how to access it. But I think we're in a time where he will teach us how to tap back into that power for ourselves, for our families, for our friends, even for our neighbors and for strangers, if we desire it and if we seek him for it.
Yeah. You know, Danielle, as you were reading Isaiah, I was just reminded of the fact that, God is love. God is love, and the primary mission of Jesus, as foretold in Isaiah, was to bring good news to the captives, to lift the brokenhearted, and to give hope to the poor, the rejected, and the outcast. That was Jesus's mission. And if we are not moving in that spirit, and if that is not our motive in all that we do, then, it is absolutely worthless. As St. Paul said, you can have everything, you can do everything the right way, as the Pharisees did, at least on the surface. They did everything the right way from a mechanical religious point of view. And Jesus counted all of that rubbish. In fact, he was harder on the Pharisees than he was on anybody else. I mean, he reserved his harshest criticisms for those who, in the eyes of the world and in the eyes of society, were absolutely punctilious in their observance of religious ritual and religious law. And yet Jesus was deeply offended by that. And not because they were following the law, but because they had developed a spirit of pride and egotism and legalism, which is utterly incompatible with the humble love that Jesus came to give us. So I think the scripture today is such an important reminder. And I have to remind myself of this all the time. We always have to be moving in a spirit of love and of compassion,
Yeah.
which is the reason why, Danielle, I hate all of the pettiness that sometimes exists in grassroots advocacy and grassroots politics, because it seems so often that people lose sight of the objectives in order to make sure that they have these little fiefdoms, and anybody who invades their fiefdom, no matter what good they may be doing, are rejected, demeaned, undermined, and criticized. And I really think that that is part of the reason why the Republican Party has not achieved some of the good results that we could have, precisely because we've forgotten that we are supposed to be moving in a spirit of love and benevolence and magnanimity for each other. And just remember what Jesus said and the reason why he came here. Some of the religious institutions that have been built up, I think, really sabotage and injure and undermine the true message of Jesus much more so than they advance it. And I think the heart of Christ the real heart of Christ has been concealed to the world who desperately needs it, precisely because of the barrier of false religion and pride and legalism.
Well said, Chris. Absolutely. And it's been on my mind a lot lately that even on the cross, Jesus was moved in compassion. He was moved in forgiveness. He was up there suffering more than we can imagine, and full of compassion, full of forgiveness, and full of love. And so even as we approach today, and a lot of good bills that got crushed by people. You and I have often said this, Chris. We haven't said it that much this session, though. None of this is personal. This is strictly how people voted. This is our observations, right? This is in a lot of ways it's data. It's just pure data and fact. And so we want to be moving and operating and speaking in truth. And we certainly don't want to do anything in a way that would feel or be viewed as a personal attack on anyone. But
Absolutely,
we will call them
Danielle.
like we see them. We will call them like we
We
see
will
them.
call them like we see them, but our policy, your policy, LeCag's policy, State of Freedom policy is that we simply do not engage in personal attacks against any candidate, against any public official under any circumstances. We can be harsh in our criticism, but that criticism is focused on actions that they take that directly affect every citizen in the state of Louisiana. And that is not only fair game, but it's critically important that citizens know how their representatives are voting. But if you will never hear us attack anybody personally about any of their personal foibles, personal failures, personal mistakes, because we know that we all have planks in our own eyes, and that we have to get the plank out of our own eyes so that we can see clearly to get the splinter out of our brother's eyes. And way too many people spend too much time trying to get the splinter out of their brother's eye and not enough time trying to get the plank out of their own eyes. And so that's what I want to try to focus on in all humility moving forward. But these records, we got to get them out there, and I'm feel very privileged to be in a position to do so.
Yep. Agree with you, Chris. And we have Gail in the chat. Welcome, Gail. Thanks for joining us this morning. She says, I'm reminded in John chapter 17, Jesus emphasizes unity as he prayed for us. I couldn't agree with you more. Unity is certainly lacking when it comes to a lot of these votes and when it comes to a lot of the way that the quote unquote Republican Party in Louisiana is operating. So why don't we get into it, Chris? You ready?
Let's rock.
Okay, well, today we are in part one, as I said, of what we believe will be a 4-part series recap. We thought we could squeeze it into 2, maybe 3, but no, I think it's going to have to be 4 episodes.
Just too much stuff, Danielle. And we got an obligation to make sure that what we cover correctly and thoroughly.
That's right. That's right. And so we want to be here and give a faithful accounting. We're going to start the top of the day today with carbon capture and property rights. We're also going to hit on energy and the environment today. So hold on to your hats, folks.
Indeed.
There's a lot of salt to go around. But we'll start out here first with House Bill 4 by Representative Chuck Owen. This was his bill, Chris, that would have simply meant local autonomy for deciding carbon capture projects. And that bill was killed in the House Natural Resources and Environment Committee. And I just want to maybe mention, let me come back to my other notes here. I have so many notes, that the House Natural Resources and Environment Committee is an 18-person committee in the House side, the House committee, with 16 Republicans and 2 Democrats. I want everybody to keep in mind that this is a committee of 16 Republicans and 2 Democrats. So when you see how many of these really good, really important bills failed, we have only Republicans to blame, really. And we can start out by naming who voted against this. As I said, it was killed in the House Natural Resources and Environment. It was in a 6-10 vote. Let's see. Jason DeWitt, Jessica Domingue, Tim Kerner, Jeremy Lacombe, Jacob Landry, Joe Engeron, Neil Reiser, and Z. Zarang all voted against this bill.
7 Republicans there, Danielle, voted against a bill to simply allow local jurisdictions and local government to be able to determine for themselves whether or not their local populace wants carbon capture sequestration in their parishes. Killed in House Natural Resources Committee, and Danielle, that was the HB 304 was the very first, HB 4 was the very first bill that was called in the 2025 session before the House Natural Resources Committee. The people there were just overwhelmingly in favor of the legislation. I mean, the hearings went all day long, and people from all over Louisiana were there, deeply concerned about allowing private companies to come on for economic benefit and in their parishes and put all this garbage on their property. Cohen did such a fabulous job explaining the bill, presenting the bill. And, you and I remember, were incensed by the Republican votes on this bill in light of the overwhelming sentiment by the citizens in favor of it. But yes, those 7 Republicans were the reason why that very important bill to give local autonomy was crushed in the House Natural Resources Committee, never to be revived, because as a matter of policy and procedure, committee procedure, you can't bring it back if it is defeated. Only in a tie vote can a bill be brought back. So that went down permanently, that very important bill, because of Republicans.
Yeah. And Chris, if there are some people absent who said, hey, I would have really liked to vote on that, it could be resurrected if it could have been a tie if they were present. Is that right?
That's correct. But there weren't enough of them that would have made a difference in a revote because of all the Republicans who voted against it.
And what's so upsetting to me about this bill failing is that it shows that these Republicans think that they know better than the people who sent them to Baton Rouge to represent them. That's what this vote tells me.
Yes, and these are Republicans who run on an agenda of local autonomy, who run on an agenda of beating back an ever encroaching government, state and federal, returning sovereignty and power to the people and to local jurisdictions. That's what they run on. But that's not how they voted on this bill, on HB4, or on a number of others. And voters just absolutely have to remember this. This was a hugely important bill, which is probably why it was the first one called. And it wasn't even close in the initial.
No, it wasn't close. And another one that was not close was House Bill 78 by Representative. Is this the right one that I wanted to talk about? Yeah, House Bill 78, Representative DeWitt Carrier. This is another local autonomy bill, but it was specific to Allen Parish. Chris, you mentioned that there were two other similar bills. They were all heard in House Municipal, Parochial, and Cultural Affairs. My least favorite committee, the committee that I believe is absolutely unconstitutional, but they were all killed there.
Yeah, they were killed. Three bills, Chuck Owen, Representative Romero, and Representative Carrier. They brought the bills what's called in globo because they all asked for the same thing.
Yeah.
Once HB4 was gone, where there was not going to be a uniform allowance for all local parishes to make this decision, what they did was said, well, we're going to come back and we're going to at least request it for our parishes. And that's what they did. All three of them were before the House Parochial Committee, and they made, again, very eloquent arguments under federalism, for local authority, let the people make these decisions. And largely because of the votes of three Republicans on the House Parochial and Municipal Affairs Committee, all three of those bills went down. And those Republicans who voted against them were Beth Billings, DeWitt Carrier, and Barbara Freiberg. Those three Republicans were responsible for the killing of those bills.
He was responsible for the killing of his own bill?
No, I'm sorry. Not Carrier, Carver. I can't read my own writing. Danielle, they don't call you the eagle eye and the brilliant prognosticator for no reason. You're exactly right. Couldn't read my writing. Exactly. It was Billings, Carver, and Freiberg.
Okay,
Billings,
cool.
Carver, and Freiberg. Thank you for the explanation. No legitimate reason for this whatsoever.
No. And the next bill up, Chris, is another one that promotes local control. House Bill 304 by Representative Robbie Carter. This is related to civil claims for expropriation. The venue would have to be local to the project rather than, wherever the company is located or something like that. This bill made it all the way through, believe it or not. And there were 32 Republicans who voted no in the House. I'll list them because we want you to be listening for your representative to know if they're voting against your interest. That is why we're doing this. This is to
and
expose.
Before you get into the right, Danielle, and before you get into the names, I want our listeners to understand that all this bill would have required that any actions to seize property for CCS be brought in the parish where the property is located. This really doesn't cut to the heart or to the core of CCS. This is just a venue provision to create as much convenience as possible for a property owner whose property may be on the verge of being expropriated. That's what this bill was about.
That's what this bill was about. And these are the 32 Republicans in the House who voted against it. They are Tony Bacala, Larry Bagley, Dennis Bamberg, Bo Boyer, Stephanie Barrault, Beth Billings, Chad Boyer, Josh Carlson, DeWitt Carrier, Kim Carver, Raymond Cruz, Paula Davis, Philip DeVilliers, that's the speaker, who did not have to lodge a vote on this, Jason DeWitt, Daryl Desitel, Jessica Domingue, Foy Gadberry, Jay Galley, Brian Glorioso, Troy Hebert, Chance Henry, Big John Ilg, Mike Johnson, Dixon McMakin, Joe Angeron, Neil Reiser, Annie Spell, Polly Thomas, Debbie Villio, Roger Wilder, Jeff Wiley, and Mark Wright. There were also 6 Republicans who were absent for this vote. They were Jacob Broad, Julie Emerson, Michael Mellorin, Philip Tarver, and John Weibel. Chris, the one vote in this list that is a little surprising to me is Ray Cruz, and I wonder if he maybe corrected his vote later if it was an accident.
He probably, I'm sure Ray Cruz did, because Ray has been consistently outspoken and always voted the right way when it comes to these local issues. And I know that he believes that local government governs best. There's no question. So it may be a mistake on his part. I'm not sure exactly. Maybe he wasn't exactly clear on what the bill was, but it's just, I can't emphasize enough that these Republicans voted against a bill. So in other words, Danielle, they couldn't even make the slightest concession to property owners when it comes to this CCS racket, not even a bill that would give them a concession on venue, making the venue more convenient for them. That is abominable. It's reprehensible to me.
Yeah, it is. It is. I'm excited to share a fantastic opportunity for State of Freedom listeners who are interested in investing in precious metals or even starting a home-based business in the precious metals industry. Metal Stacks is a precious metals collectors club where you can buy your metals at the best prices on the market, actual dealer cost. They are beating the big sites. They have no credit card fees and no minimums. If you're just interested in purchasing metals at a great price, visit metalstacks.com/DWalker. Get to shopping. That helps me out. I get the commission. You can also refer people to Metal Stacks for an additional income. If you're interested in learning about the referral business aspect of Metal Stacks, email me directly at danielle@freedomstate.us for more information. Next up, House Bill 380 by Representative Rodney Shammerhorn. This was one of several attempts this legislative session to remove eminent domain authority for CO2 sequestration. This was killed in the House Natural Resources Committee. Chris, was this maybe the strongest bill for eminent domain standalone?
This was the strongest bill, with the exception of HB 396 by Representative McCormick, which would have just declared CCS illegal outright across the board. Probably the shortest bill of the entire session. But this bill, second to that, was the most important because it would have repealed eminent domain for carbon capture sequestration in Louisiana, and it would have removed current Louisiana law that says that carbon capture sequestration is, quote, a public good as declared by the legislature in 2020. So this would have gutted CCS, eminent domain for CCS in its entirety, and HB 380.
Yeah, of course, it was killed by that Republican committee. There were 6 Republican no votes for that and 4 absences. Jessica Domingue, who I have started calling in my own mind Jessica Eminent Domain for this very reason. Jeremy Lacombe, Jacob Landry, Joe Angeron, Neil Reiser, and Z. Zarang. For those of you who are down in the Terrebonne-Lafourche area, those names are going to start sounding very familiar because they voted against almost every single bill that's related to giving the people power over carbon capture, which is just remarkable.
And keep in mind, Danielle, these votes in committee, it is final. Unless it's a tie vote, if you lose in committee, it is over. You go no further on it, which is why this was so deeply significant. This bill was extremely consequential, and yes, the same Republicans caused it to fail.
Yeah, and I'll list the absences as well. They were Jacob Broad, DeWitt Carrier, Tim Kerner, and Lauren Ventrella. Now, what I can say about the absences, they are pretty much the same for almost all of them, but we have to remember that most of the carbon capture bills got heard in a single day. So there was probably a good chunk of time when these bills were going through that several people may have been presenting bills in other committees. They may not have been.
And that is fair.
Yeah. Okay. Next up, House Bill 396 by Representative Danny McCormick. And that's the one you just referenced, Chris, the one that would have made carbon dioxide sequestration in Louisiana illegal. That was killed in committee pretty swiftly in a 3-8 vote with 7 Republicans, the same 7 Republicans. You're going to hear these names over and over again when it comes to killing good legislation related to carbon capture. There, Jacob Broad, Jessica Eminent Domain, Jeremy Lacombe, Jacob Landry, Joe Angeron, Neil Reiser, and Z. Zarang.
Yes, the very same ones. And quite frankly, Danielle, carbon capture sequestration should be illegal in Louisiana, because not only because of the harm that it causes, but because of the fact that it produces absolutely nothing of any value to anybody, and it is subsidized and paid for with our money. I thought it was a very good bill. I never really thought, absent a miracle, that legislation would get through the committee. But as always, I have great respect and admiration for Representative Danny McCormick for bringing legislation because of the value that we derive from forcing record votes on important bills. And that's why this was so important.
Yeah, definitely. I believe, Chris, that, let's see, I believe I saw recently, and I'm trying to find it online. So if I do find it, I'll let you know. But I believe that President Trump came out and proclaimed this past week that carbon dioxide is necessary for human and plant life and is not a toxin. So hopefully that's going to go a long way when it comes to the impact of laws, the trickle-down effect of laws for all of this.
Yes, leave it to President Trump to reveal the obvious to those who are either negligently or willfully blind.
Yeah. All right. Maybe also worth mentioning on this one, Chris. Now, this, since we kind of took a little veer off, this was the bill that would have declared carbon dioxide sequestration as illegal in Louisiana. It did fail. Representative Brett Guyman, who's the chair of the committee, did not vote for that, which I can understand. One, he didn't have to lodge a vote because he's the chair of the committee and it wasn't a close vote. And secondly, this would have put him in a tough position for carrying some of his other legislation, particularly since he has worked so closely with industry to try and find some middle ground here.
Sure, and it could have served as a real disadvantage to him going forward on his bills. And again, Danielle, this wouldn't have made a difference, and it's customary for chairmen of committees not to cast a vote unless it's the deciding vote.
Yeah.
So this was not unusual at all.
No, there were 5 absences for this. They were Kim Coates, Tim Kerner, Shane Mack, and Lauren Ventrilla. I would imagine that most of them were otherwise entangled with bringing legislation. But
I think you're right, as attested to by the fact that when they were present, and even later on the floor, they generally voted the right way on carbon capture sequestration. So I'm sure that they were out in probably handling other legislation in other committees.
Yeah. All right. Next is House Bill 522 by Representative Danny McCormick. This was his bill that came after his attempt to ban it. He attempted to put a moratorium on carbon dioxide sequestration, but that failed in committee.
Yeah, failed in committee, and Neil Reiser, who of course voted against it. His big objection was, but this is going to stop the projects. This is going to stop the projects that are already ongoing. And I'm like, Representative Reiser, that's the whole purpose of this. We're trying to drop it. And the reason why he wanted to do it for a year, Danny, is so that we could so we could study the effects of carbon capture sequestration, both the positive effects, the negative effects, the potential harms. And you know why that was so important? Because none of that was done in 2020 in the legislature when carbon capture sequestration was declared a public good as a matter of public policy. Zero debate. They don't have it. Most of the people who are sitting up on these committees, Danielle, they don't have a clue what carbon capture sequestration really is, and they really don't care what the people who were opposing this legislation, what kind of an effect it has on the people, on the environment, on the safety and the welfare of the community. That's not their concern. Their concern is the money, unfortunately.
That's true. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Okay, next up was House Bill 537 by Representative Rodney Shammerhorn, and this would have authorized liens for victims of potential CO2-related pipeline disasters. That failed.
Yeah, and think about this, Danielle. I put this right on the same level with HB 304, which we talked about that one yet on the show yet? I can't remember. Robbie Carter's bill.
Yeah, we
Okay,
did.
yeah,
the
we
venue.
did. We just did. Yeah, I put this bill on the same level as 304. So you go in, you do your carbon capture sequestration, you have a pipeline rupture or some other major disaster that injures people, that damages property in very significant ways. This bill would have just set up a statutory lien with funds in it reserved for people who may be injured by a carbon capture sequestration problem that occurs. And the House Natural Resources Committee, these Republicans couldn't bring themselves to vote even for that bill.
Yeah. So why don't I
Name
list
them again, absolutely.
I'll name them again. They're going to sound very familiar to you all by now. Jason DeWitt, Jessica Domingue, Jeremy Lacombe, Jacob Landry, Joe Angeron, Neil Reiser, and Z. Zarang. Unbelievable.
Yes. Yeah. It truly is unbelievable. And as far as I'm concerned, Danielle, We can't mention these names enough. Obviously, we're going to be fair, and we're going to mention some marginal redemption on the part of some of these on a later bill we'll talk about. But the fact of the matter is, doesn't change the fact that they killed these items of legislation that we're talking about right now.
Yeah. And Representative Rodney Schermerhorn brought another bill that was trying to deal with the eminent domain issue from another angle. That was his House Bill 553. And that one got voted down as well, Chris.
Yeah, this was eminent domain strictly for carbon capture sequestration pipelines. And yes, that was voted down as well by the same Republican.
The same exact Republicans, Jason DeWitt, Jessica, eminent domain, Travis Johnson, Jeremy Lacombe, Jacob Landry, Joe Angeron, Neil Reiser, and Z. Zarang.
And Danielle, it's important to understand what we're talking about here. This vote is not just a vote on carbon capture sequestration. What they are saying in these votes with regard to the broader principle of core private property rights versus industry that is being absolutely, soaked in our money, and they see the money, they see the billions of dollars, they see how much they can make and how much they can enrich themselves. And so they chose the money, the profit, the industry over core constitutional rights of the citizens. And that is what is so fundamentally offensive about these votes to me. We're not just talking about a vote on whether or not you're going to name a school after somebody, or even whether or not you're going to raise or lower taxes. This issue goes to the fundamental heart, the lungs of our constitutional structure and system. Our founding fathers viewed private property rights as the core foundation of our system. And these Republicans moved and acted directly against an assertion of that principle. That's why these votes matter so much.
That's right. And it's not just that the state can operate and take away your private property for something that is quote unquote a public good. Now they have made it so that private entities, Chevron, BP, whoever is running these pipeline projects, can take away your property for something that is not a public good, something that many people do not believe to be a public good. At least the science is not settled on this, if we want to put it in the mildest of terms, of that being a public good. So yeah, I think that pretty much.
So it's worth mentioning because the issue is so important, Danielle. You're exactly right. They're not even trying to pursue eminent domain for carbon capture sequestration based on any legitimate argument that it's a public good under the Constitution, which eminent domain is allowed if something is genuinely a public good. They're not even arguing that anymore. This is purely for private economic gain, purely for economic profit by private companies. A gross abuse of eminent domain, for sure. And yet, once again, they glossed over that and went forward and killed these bills.
Yeah. And I don't know that any of these people are, what I would view to be rabid environmentalists who really believe in the carbon capture debate. If they believe that carbon capture, carbon dioxide is killing us all, which we know it's not. But I do believe that some of them do have financial stakes in this industry, have something to gain. I do believe that some of them are in a position where industry has leaned very heavily on them because industry is present in that particular district. And I do believe that people who have they have an indirect interest in it, right? So some of their donors may also have a direct advantage should this bill, should eminent domain continue for carbon capture.
Yeah. So the oil and gas industry want the carbon capture sequestration because they see a big pile of money and they're more than willing to build something on other people's property against their will in order to that we don't need and that is probably harmful in order to make a bunch of money. I was down there, Danielle, every day, and I never heard one argument from the proponents of carbon capture sequestration that this is necessary for the public health, that this is a public good, that this is important and we need this for critical infrastructure or because it will enhance the health. Not one. All they talked about was all the money and the jobs that are going to be created and that sort of thing. So nobody even argues anymore that carbon capture sequestration is a public good. It's not. Every single reason that used to exist that they would proffer and put forward in favor of carbon capture sequestration has been exploded. Those myths have been exploded, and now it is all about the money. And if you just go down there and listen to some of these hearings in there, that's what it was about. All about the money and all about the jobs that it's going to create. Well, with our money. So it's not really organic economic boom. It is something that is being funded with our money.
Yeah. Let me build something with your money that you don't want and don't need. And while we're at it, steal your property to do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I would love to see maybe Representative McCormick or Representative Guyman bring next year is a bill that would promote the planting of trees, like a big tree planting instead of carbon capture. So if we're all so concerned about all this carbon dioxide floating around out there for free, maybe we can do what, was so talked about in the 90s. We had a lot of tree planting campaigns in the 90s. We haven't had a good tree planting campaign in a long time, Chris.
Well, we have not. And I'll remind you before we go on here, Danielle, that, let's just assume that carbon capture sequestration does achieve the results that they want, at least the immediate results, which is to capture the carbon dioxide from the sky, bury it in the ground, and let's just say hypothetically that results in a measurable reduction of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Moves, as Joe Biden would say, moves us to net zero by 2050 or 2030, whatever. Let's just assume that's the case. As I've said before, 0.004% of the atmosphere is made up of carbon dioxide. If that gets down to 0.03, 0.02, it starts having a drastic effect on animal habitat, on our plants that start to die. It will, and maybe, Danielle, maybe the big globalists who really are pushing this, maybe that's their objective.
Yeah.
Maybe their ultimate objective is to depopulate the earth. But if you remove all the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere that we need and that plants need, that's exactly what you're going to do. You're going to extinguish a lot of people from the earth.
Well, that's probably part of the plan. I'm not saying it's part of the plan from our legislature,
I
but
don't
it is
believe
part
it's
of the
part of the
plan
plan.
from the globalist. I do.
Yep. I agree with you.
Okay, next up, House Bill 585 by Representative Danny McCormick. Chris, this was so disgusting. All his bill was going to do was require advance notice to owners, to property owners, surface and mineral rights owners, before carbon sequestration happens on their property. You just
Yeah,
gotta
so we
come on.
so we want to come show up at your property. We want to tell you what we're going to do here, and we don't even have to really give you any notice that we're coming. This bill would have said,
Just bring the drill, just bring the backhoe.
bring the drill, bring the equipment, and let's get rolling. This bill would have simply said you got to give advance notice, sufficient advance notice to property owners of what your intentions are, what your plans are, what the specific layout is, what portion of the property you intend to use to do this project. Again, a bill that you would expect even Republicans who favor carbon capture sequestration to vote for, but no. 18, Danielle, if I'm not mistaken, 18 Republicans in the House voted no on this?
Yeah, I have them here. They are Stephanie Baralt, Beth Billings, Chad Boyer, Paula Davis, Speaker DeVilliers, who I like to remind everyone he did not have to cast a vote, Jessica Domingue, Barbara Freiberg, Brian Glorioso, Stephanie Hilferty, Big John Ilg, Dixon McMakin, Joe Angeron, Lori Schlegel, Annie Spell, Vinnie St. LeBlanc, Polly Thomas, Debbie Villio, and Z Zarang.
And keep in mind, Dixon McMakin is my rep here and very, very disappointed in him. Not just on this. I know we're on this topic today, but on a number of other things he's done as well.
Yeah. I'm sure that'll continue to come up. And there's a couple more bills left on carbon capture, but we're getting toward the end. The next one is House Bill 601. If y'all followed us closely this session, you'll know we talked about this bill a lot because it was languishing for a while. This was Representative Brett Guyman's kind of his masterpiece, if you will, for the session. It would have tackled a lot of the issues related to CO2 sequestration. Chris, would you remind us what it would have done?
Absolutely. And this is the bill that I will look back on this session and have just tremendous gratitude and gratification for all of the work that was done to revive HB 601. Representative Guyman's bill simply would have repealed eminent domain for carbon capture sequestration pipelines across the board. You can't use eminent domain for CCS pipelines, period. That was his bill. And like these other bills that we've talked about, the first time it went before the House Natural Resources Committee, it lost in a very significant vote. I think it was 11-5, 11-6, whatever it was, because of the votes of all the Republicans that we've been mentioning. When that happened, we raised holy hell at that point about this bill. We were raising holy hell, Danielle, about all the other ones too. But the reason why none of those bills could be called back before the committee, because it wasn't a tie vote. They lost substantially by procedural rules. You couldn't bring those bills back. We were raising hell about all of them. And these rhinos sitting there getting pummeled by their constituents and by citizens across Louisiana said, we got to do something. We got to do something. HB 601 was a 7-7 tie. So we can bring that one back before the committee. And sure enough, it went back before the committee after that 7-7 tie, which was technically a loss. Went back and passed, I believe, it passed substantially, with several of the Republicans who voted against it originally switching their votes very quickly, by the way, with no criticism of Representative Guyman or the bill. They couldn't do it quickly enough. The Rhino Republicans who came back and switched their votes to get HB 601 out of the committee on the second try.
Yeah, and they were Tim Kerner, DeWitt Carrier, Jeremy Lacombe, and Jacob Landry. And then this bill went to the House floor and languished there and died there.
It languished there and died there, but I think that was in part because of Representative Guyman's tactical maneuver. He realized, and this is despicable in and of itself, realized that even though it probably would be a close vote, he probably would not have the votes on the House floor to pass it. So while encouraging us and other advocacy groups to continue to hammer their representatives on this vote, distract them, vote on 601. In the meantime, Representative Guyman was doing sort of a circular maneuver. He went over to SB 244 Hensgen's bill, when it came over to the House, and he inserted a number of the provisions that were in 601 into SB 244, and very brilliantly got that bill through House Natural Resources Committee with amendments and got it back and got it up onto the House floor where it was voted. So he basically said, we don't have the votes to get 601. It's not going to happen, but we're still pushing on it from our perspective. So the representatives don't really know. They just think, oh, what are we going to do about this? Meanwhile, Guyman is going around on the backside doing an end run and sticking these provisions in another bill, gets it out of House Natural Resource Committee onto the House floor, and we just put pressure. We had a microscope, Danielle, on the votes on the House floor on SB 244, which ultimately passed with a number of the provisions of 601. And if you want me to talk about those, we can, or if you want to talk about the votes, and then we can talk about what is SB 244 as amended.
Yeah, maybe I'll just mention, Chris, that the governor testified in committee on this in the House side because he was supportive of a different aspect of this bill. This was a massive bill, by the way. It was not short in any order. I think it was maybe close to a 200-page bill, if I'm not mistaken. And so it really helped that the governor was supportive of some aspects of this bill and championing it, because some people who would not have ordinarily voted for it did vote for it. So he had rallied the vote in there. I will mention just briefly that Geoengineering and Zizarang are the only two who voted against it in committee. So
So
that bears mention.
Orgeron and Zerang have been utterly and absolutely consistent in their opposition to any restrictions on carbon capture, sequestration, development in Louisiana. I believe that a big part of the reason why Governor Landry was down there on 244 was because he has received and continues to receive a tremendous amount of criticism from the grassroots for being completely mute this session on the issue of carbon capture sequestration. He hasn't said a word. And I've been very critical of him because I don't believe that's the way leaders operate. When you have issues of this profound consequence, you can't afford to remain neutral in matters of profound urgency like this. So he was massively criticized for it. And I think that he was trying to salvage some degree of credibility as well by coming in and saying, I support SB 244. So there it is. So then it passes out and then goes onto the House floor. Now, Danielle, when it got to the House floor as amended, and by the way, the amendments basically said it gutted the law as it existed in Louisiana, saying that carbon capture sequestration is a public good in Louisiana as a matter of public policy. That is a huge deal and really cripples eminent domain for carbon capture sequestration. And secondly, Guyman put in there that in order to do CCS, you have to prove that you're what's called a common carrier, which means you're transporting a public commodity for the public good. Well, I'm sorry, when you're capturing CCS in the air and burying it into the ground, that is not a public commodity that the public can use and benefit from. So they're going to have a really hard time, and for both of the reasons that I just said, getting CCS off the ground in Louisiana. Brett Guyman was absolutely brilliant here. I do think it's worth noting the Republicans in the House who voted against SB 244 as amended.
Yep, and I have them here. Their names are going to sound very, very familiar by now. Jacob Broad, Vincent Cox, Paula Davis, Jessica Domingue, Barbara Freiberg, Geoengineering, and Z Zarang. And I will make mention, Jessica Domingue is my representative. She voted for it in the committee, but when the governor wasn't there to see her vote, perhaps, I'm not sure, she did vote against it on the floor.
So, do you think that she had an evolving philosophical view on this, or do you think that was based purely on politics? I would imagine it was purely on politics.
Well, based on the track record, I would say it had to be politics.
Yeah, she couldn't bear to honor her deep and completely misguided convictions when she was sitting right in front of the governor. But when he wasn't there on the House floor, she returned to her original viewpoint.
Perhaps that's what it means. And then we were really nervous when it went over to the Senate for concurrence, Chris, because we weren't sure if they were going to try and take out Representative Guyman's amendments that he worked so hard to get in. However, they did. They voted unanimously to concur with the House bill, and the only notable absence was Senator, who I'm now calling Comrade Greg Miller.
Well, actually, was he absent or did he vote no?
I thought he was absent, but
Well,
I can double
I think
check.
we need to take a minute to look at that because I thought he had voted no, and I may be wrong.
Let me see real quick here. Yeah, the motion to concur was 34-0. He was absent, Chris.
Okay, so
He's
he
the only
didn't.
Republican was absent. There were several Democrats who were absent.
Okay, so Miller didn't show up for it. Okay, all right. Miller wasn't there, but it passed unanimously other than him on the Senate concurred. And by the way, Daniel, we had hundreds and hundreds of emails and calls. That was one of the most important bills that we were focused on obsessively over the last few days of the session because we knew that if they gutted those amendments, then literally there's no restrictions on carbon capture sequestration in Louisiana. Hugely important. It was literally the difference between private property owners having significant protections against CCS development and having none. And that's why it was so important. So they knew that we were on it and that we were going to be absolutely documented every single thing they did on the Senate floor. So they left it alone.
They left it alone. Very good. That rounds us out. Yeah.
No, but I want to tell you, I forgot. It just popped into my head. SB 36. SB 36 by Hinskens was also something that Representative Guyman worked behind the scenes on very much. And that passed, if I'm not mistaken. And you can check while I'm talking about it. But that bill requires what's called substantial consideration for local governments
That's right.
in determining whether or not CCS permits will be issued. So there will be a statutory requirement that local governments be given substantial consideration on the opinions that they express about whether or not they want CCS. So that's another very significant development. Did that pass all the way through?
It did. It's been enrolled, but the governor hasn't signed either of the last two we've talked about. So not SB 244 by Hinskens or SB 36.
Those are the two most important CCS bills that remain. If those two bills are signed by the governor and go into law, it makes like I said, a substantial difference with regard to property rights against CCS. So I am extremely eager to see what Governor Landry does with these bills.
Yeah, and it's probably worth noting as well, Chris, that House Bill 304 by Representative Robbie Carter, the claims venue bill related to expropriation for carbon capture, has been signed by the governor and goes into effect on August 1st.
Excellent. And we've already talked about the Republicans who voted against that.
Yeah. All right, well, let's switch gears a little bit and move on to the energy debate. There was a great bill brought by Representative Jacob Landry this session, House Bill 692. This bill promotes domestic oil production as well as gas and the strengthening and resilience of our energy grid. And I believe Colonel Tommy Waller from the Center for Security Policy, who is probably one of the foremost experts in the country on this topic, went to the legislature and testified on behalf of this bill.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of seeing him again. I had met Colonel Waller before. He's a proud U.S. Marine, and very few people know more about grid security than Tommy Waller. I don't know if there's anybody in the country who knows more about it. So he testified in favor of it, and the bill passed through, fortunately. And the bill, basically, it requires Louisiana to focus on domestic oil production so that we can be independent of foreign oil. And it requires us to take steps to increase the vulnerabilities of our grid. J.C. Harmon is very high on this bill. I have enormous respect for J.C. Harmon. And of course, if Tommy Waller is testifying in favor of something, I would go in there blindfolded and support it. That's the kind of respect that I have for him.
Yeah. So I'm eager to see what in the world happens to increase the resilience of our grid, Chris. I guess that's going to be a job for probably the legislature can give some guidance, and then the Public Service Commission probably has some work to do, as well as the energy companies themselves. Huh?
No question about it. But Jacob Landry, for this bill alone, Danielle, we have a graphic series, Profiles in Courage. And Jacob Landry, despite his poor votes on the carbon capture sequestration, which people have every right to know about, he did come back and redeem himself on a couple of votes after that, as we've talked about on CCS. But just because of this bill, which is so important, we did include him in our graphic series. And so we applaud Representative Landry for understanding the importance of this.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Okay, great. Let me see. Okay, the next bill in the energy space is House Bill 615. It was also brought by Representative Brett Guyman, who carried a lot of good bills this session. As I know, you can kind of get the sense that he has been active in this space. He was trying to give some regulatory guidelines for solar facilities in the state. Not the least of which would include local determination on the parameters of solar facilities in the parish or the municipality. It made it out of the committee 12-0, but it failed on the House floor, and we can talk about that vote after, Chris, but maybe you can give us a little more color about this solar bill.
Yeah, HB 615. It wasn't saying that you can't do solar generation facilities. It was simply stating that local jurisdictions have a right to establish the parameters and the regulatory structure of this development to ensure that people's private property is not trespassed or infringed upon. So again, it was a local autonomy, local authority bill. I know how you feel about all this solar generation development, Danielle, but even assuming for a second that it is something that would be efficacious and that would actually provide an appreciable source of energy. Let's just assume that for a second. The bill simply would have said you can do it, but local authorities will establish the parameters, the permitting, and the regulatory structure of this development. Once again, Republicans, the historical principles of our party is local authority to the maximum degree possible. This bill, and this is one that will stick in my craw until 50 years from now, maybe I'll forget it, that this failed on the House floor in a 53 to 46 vote because of Republicans.
Yeah, and these are not this was not a vote for freedom, right? Because you think about it, rhinos love regulating things. They really do. But this they love regulating until it comes to some industry that has a very strong lobby that really pushes hard on them, and then suddenly they're a lot less interested in providing parameters for how companies should operate. And that's, to me,
Yeah.
that's gross.
Within the context of this bill, Danielle, right here, it makes me want to come up with a new acronym for Rhino. Regulation is never over.
Yeah. Well,
Rhino.
except okay. Well, the 26 Republicans who voted against this are Tony Bacala, Larry Bagley, Dennis Bamberg, Stephanie Barrell, Beth Billings, Rhonda Butler, Kim Carver, Paula Davis, Daryl Desitel, Michael Eccles, Barbara Freiberg, Foy Gadberry, Brian Glorioso, Troy Hebert, Big John Ilg, Mike Johnson, Jack McFarland, Dixon McMakin, Joe Angeron, Annie Spell, Vincent St. Blanc, Joe Stagney, Polly Thomas, Chris Turner, Debbie Villio, and Jeff Wiley. So
Yeah,
there you have it, folks.
and Mellerin was absent, right?
I don't know. I didn't have
Yeah,
that one in
Michael.
my
That's okay.
list.
Michael Mellerin was absent for the bill. Did you say that Jessica Domain voted against or for this?
Well, she's not in the against list, Chris.
Well, then I have to. Then we have to give marginal credit to
That's right.
Eminent Domain for voting in favor of this bill to give local authorities the power to regulate and permitting process for solar generation facilities. She deserved give credit where credit's due. It's
That's
not
right.
due very often, so on those rare occasions when it's due, we have to give it.
Yeah,
If
you're
in
so
fact
right. She
we're
did.
right.
She did. I looked it up. She did vote for it. So
Well, there you go. This might be the last time for another year or two, but we will give credit when credit's due.
that's right.
The secret to losing weight 2 times faster has gone viral. See the transformations hundreds of thousands of people are experiencing around the world with the Slender Eyes drops. These homeopathic drops are proven to control appetite, support thyroid function, help balance the body's pH, improve energy, boost mood, and increase metabolic rate. I've heard firsthand testimonials from droppers in their 20s to droppers in their 80s who say that the Slender Eyes drops have completely revolutionized their lives. Try the drops today to see the results for yourself. To learn more about the Slender Eyes drops or other incredible natural wellness and lifestyle products, email me at info@freedomstate.us and put drops in the subject line, or visit the Shop Our Partners page at freedomstate.us. We also have links to those in the show notes. Thank you for supporting the State of Freedom.
Okay, now, Chris, we can move on to some bills that affect the environment. The first one is House Bill 608 by Representative Kim Coates. The second one is Senate Bill 46 by Senator Mike Facey, my senator. Both of these bills would have addressed the issue of geoengineering and weather modification. Kim Coates's had a heck of a lot more difficult time than Senator Facey's. I believe, Chris, you described this as having significantly more teeth when it came to penalties for failure to adhere to this law.
I think so, even though Senator Facey's bill does have significant civil penalties associated with it.
Okay.
These would have been more onerous, the penalties in 608. But the real reason why this bill, Coach's bill, failed so badly on the floor was because the lobby, Louisiana Association of Business and Industry, came out with a floor note against it. The problem is the floor note that stated their objections were removed from the bill before it was voted on in final form, and yet lobbies still opposed it. And so these cowering Republicans who still just absolutely cower under the weight and influence of lobby in the legislature couldn't bring themselves to vote for a good bill. It's important to understand, Danielle, that in its final form, all HB 608 did was ban this geoengineering, these chemtrails, which are absolutely toxic when it is being used to modify the weather, to control the climate, to block the sun, and that sort of thing. Think about the total and complete lunacy of that. And we have tons of Republicans in the legislature who could not bring themselves to vote for a bill to ban an activity being committed by people whose identity we don't even know, but clearly are doing it all over the state of Louisiana. Ban that specifically when it's being used to artificially try to change our weather and block the sunshine. That to me is about as reprehensible as you get.
It is. And I will maybe just talk about lobby's disingenuous position on this as being very similar to the bankers' disingenuous position on the gold and silver as a legal currency or as a recognized currency in the state of Louisiana. Chris, if we are opposing a bill or supporting a bill, we say why. We say why. We're very truthful about why we oppose the bill, very straightforward about it, very straightforward about why we support a bill. But what I get from lobby and what I got from the Bankers Association this session is they will tell you that they're opposed to it for a particular reason. And then if you try and clean up the bill so that you can appease the lobby, they still continue to oppose the bill, which shows us that their position was disingenuous to start with, that there is some underlying opposition to this, that they're not willing to tell you what it is.
Yeah, and Danielle, did we not come to the realization in our own research that certain companies that are members of the board of directors of lobby actually manufacture these toxins that are used in chemtrails and geoengineering? I
Well, they
believe.
certainly are chemical producers. Whether it's the toxins that are in chemtrails, I don't think we're in a position to say, but we can say that there are significant chemical manufacturers on the board of lobby.
Okay. And all the bill would have said was you can't do it, you can't use it for this specific purpose because of the harm that comes to the community. And yet still lobby was like, well, but this is going to affect industry, business, manufacturers, that sort of thing. I'm absolutely appalled that lobby would take this position and put business and profits over the health and welfare of Louisiana citizens. That's what disturbs me about this.
Including themselves, right? I mean, this is they're they're maybe acting in their own self-interest when it comes to financial gain, but not when it comes to health.
Well, exactly right. So even willing to not potentially, undermine their own health and the health of their own children in order to continue to make money, continue to produce things for this purpose. It's unbelievable. So yeah, the bill went down overwhelmingly on the House floor.
Yeah, it failed 21 to 72. And maybe we'll just mention for a change those who stood against the lobby, those who voted in favor of the bill, who voted in favor of protecting ourselves from these chemicals being released in our atmosphere, who voted against chemtrails. And they are Beryl Amity, Marcus Bryant, who's a Democrat, Rhonda Butler, Robbie Carter, another Democrat, Kim Coates Landry, Jason DeWitt, Kelly Dickerson, Kathy Edmonston, Peter Egan, Gabe Ferment, Jay Galley, Brett Guyman, Dodie Horton, Jacob Landry, Shane Mack, Danny McCormick, Chuck Owen, Neil Reiser, Rodney Schermerhorn, Philip Tarver, and Lauren Ventrella.
Yeah. Even these people, a number of whom consistently oppose the good CCS legislation, even those Republicans understand how significant this is that we stop these toxic chemicals from being dumped out of the back of planes, falling in our soil, on our kids, in our food, harming us. Even they understood that.
Yeah.
But a whole bunch of Republicans apparently didn't because of pressure from business and industry. Danielle, by the way, you and I are all for business and industry. I
That's
want
right.
everybody to have a good business and to be very successful. That's what our country was built upon. But there are certain fundamental values to which business and profit must take a back seat, and this is one of them.
Yeah. And I was talking to a listener a week or two ago, Chris, and I won't name names because I'm not sure that he wants me to name names. But he was talking about the fact that at the end of session, for anyone who votes a perfect record with Law B, they give out a bat to give, to show that they batted 100 when it came to Law B's priorities. And he makes the point that if anyone is voting 100% with any lobby, the bankers, the oil and gas industry, they're not voting with their citizens. They're voting with industry. And so I don't know that anybody should take great pride in getting a 100% score from any lobbying institution, any big corporate backed organization, because that's not going to be the position that your citizens are taking, your constituents are taking.
Exactly. And Danielle, you're so right. 100% voting in line with a particular special interest group, to me, that translates into reflexive, blind homage. That
Yeah.
doesn't translate into any kind of real reflection, real deliberation, and real consideration for what may be in the best interest. You're telling me that everything that Lobby ever supports and ever opposes is in the best interest of the fundamental health, welfare, liberty, and freedom of Louisiana citizens? I don't think so. That tells me that these Republicans are afraid of Lobby, and it tells me for that reason they don't want to do anything that opposes them. And that's not what they were sent there to do.
That's right. Well, either they're afraid of them or if they've outsourced their brain to them.
Well, maybe their brains are sitting in a small jar of Planters peanuts in perhaps one of the houses of some of the board members of Lobby under lock and key. I'm not sure. And I think after a certain period of time, once these Republicans vote long enough and consistently enough with Lobby, then I think that they get their brain back, but only on a probationary basis.
Well, Chris, what would be an interesting study for us and in the time after the session is to see how what the representative scores were for some of the different special interests versus what their scores were with us.
Yeah,
And see what the
absolutely.
delta is. I think
Let's
that'll be an
let's see what
interesting
let's see
one.
what the delta is. And I guarantee I could name a few right now. I'm not going to do it. Whose grade when it comes to voting with Louisiana citizens would be much higher. Chuck Owen, by the way, Danielle, he stood up on the House floor on one of these bills and absolutely blistered Lobby and talked about what they've become based upon what they used to be. We'll find that clip one day because I think it's important for citizens to begin to understand that Lobby really is not the organization that it used to be.
Yeah. Well, it represents the industry kind of at a federal level in a way. It's like a smaller version of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce instead of the Louisiana business lobby. I don't think it's necessarily operating any longer in the best interests of Louisiana business even.
And by the way, Danielle, just backing up a couple of years, just while we're on Lobby, Lobby has involved itself going back several years on the vaccine issue, on the
That's right.
COVID vaccine issue. I've seen Lobby representatives down there testifying on vaccine bills and whether or not an employer can mandate an experimental COVID vaccine on their employees. Mandate it. And there was a bill to prohibit that and end that, and lobby opposed that legislation. That clearly is not in the best interest of Louisiana citizens,
Not
and
even Louisiana employers.
not even Louisiana employers, many of whom did not want to, did not.
Yeah. All right, Chris. The last bill, and we've touched on it a little bit, but just to get into the finer points of it, Senator Facey's bill, which did ultimately pass, and it was his kind of companion bill in the Senate, if you will, to Representative Kim Coates' bill that would ban geoengineering and weather modification. Of course, like we just said, Representative Coates' bill did not pass because of lobby, but Senator Facey's bill made it all the way through, and we did a big push there at the end to make sure that Governor Landry would sign it, and he has.
Well, God bless Governor Landry for signing the legislation. I'm not sure that he really deserves, an undue amount of adulation or recognition, because it is something that he absolutely should have done. There's no question about it, but he did, and that needs to be recognized. But Danielle, 12 Republicans on the House floor voted against SB 46.
Yeah. And in the Senate, the vote was on party lines, but our friend Senator Comrade Greg Miller joined the Democrats in opposing the bill. The House committee, we didn't mention, but it didn't have any problems getting out of the House committee. I think it was unanimous or near unanimous. And then, as you said, on the House floor, it was 58-33. There were 14 people absent, so something was either going on or people did not want to be on the record for this. But 12 Republicans voted against it. These names are going to sound awfully familiar. Beth Billings, DeWitt Carrier, Paula Davis, Darrell Desautels, Brian Fontenot, Barbara Freiberg, Troy Hebert, Stephanie Hilferty, Jeremy Lacombe, Dixon McMakin, Vinnie St. Blanc, and Joe Stagney. Chris, do you want me to mention the ones who were absent?
Yeah, but did you say Vincent Cox voted against it? Or did he vote for it?
I didn't say Vincent Cox. No, I said Vincent St. Blanc.
Okay, all right. So Cox voted for it. Okay, I just wanted to make sure on that. Yeah.
No, he's absent. He was absent for the vote.
He was absent. So about Cox here, this is just parenthetical.
Mm-hmm.
Cox has either voted against very, very important legislation going back to the gold and silver bill in committee. He has consistently either voted against good legislation, for bad legislation, or simply been absent. So Vincent Cox has consistently come up on my radar screen as someone who is, to say the least, not a reliable Republican. And I think that's important for listeners to understand.
Yeah, it is important for listeners to understand. And maybe another notable mention here is that Joe Engeron was absent for this. Well, I believe Senator Facey is his senator. I could be wrong on that, but I believe it's true. And so I think he would have taken a little walk so that he didn't have to vote against Senator Facey's legislation.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned a minute ago, Danielle, this is the one I was confused about a minute ago. Senator Miller, Comrade Miller, was the only senator to vote no on this on the Senate floor. Is that right? Miller voted no. The same Republican, well, we'll get into it on another show because I don't want to go off on a rant. But we have a lot to say about Republican Greg Miller in our comprehensive session on property rights and infrastructure security.
Yeah.
And speech rights.
No, yeah, we have a lot to talk about him with regard to the Secretary of State's office, elections, and yeah, a whole lot.
And free speech.
And free speech, that's right. Well, that rounds us out for the day, Chris. That's the end of episode 1 recap of the session. I think some names are starting to emerge of people who are not voting with the citizens. We'll see if those names continue the thread as we touch on other issues outside of carbon capture, energy, and the environment. But I believe a number of those names are going to continue to sound familiar, continue to vote against the will of their constituents.
Absolutely. Go back and listen over a cup of coffee or over a beer to this podcast and just make sure that you know how your Republicans are voting. One of our founding fathers, Danielle, said that our constitutional republic is designed to serve an informed electorate, an informed electorate. It can't serve an electorate that is not informed about what their representatives and their legislators are doing on issues that directly affect them. That is why being familiar with these names of these Republicans, particularly the ones who opposed good legislation, helped kill good legislation, promoted bad legislation, these names must be known almost like you know your own name, so that we can make sure that we move them out and replace them with good constitutional conservatives. That's what we have to do. We have to clean house on some of these. And Danielle, maybe over the next 2 years or whatever, before they run for reelection, maybe they can redeem themselves as a result of some of the things that we're doing now. And we are forgiving, and we will give people an opportunity to redeem themselves. But as of right now, there are more than a handful of Republicans who simply need to go. It is time to go. We know their names, and we need our listeners to become more and more familiar with those names. It is not fair. It is not fair and it's unjust to have a handful of faithful constitutional conservatives in the legislature who fight the good fight every day and are abandoned by people who are supposed to be their colleagues and their allies and people who ran on the same principles that they ran on. I call that traitorous. And I don't believe that those Republicans belong in the legislature anymore. And we're going to work hard to get rid of them. Know these names, people. Know these names.
We're going to work hard on that a lot sooner than 2 years, because these people are going to start running as soon as about this time next year for their campaign, right? Because the election's in 27. So I would imagine, at least summer, fall of 26, they're going to start revving up, getting those campaign funds in the door and start their campaigning then. And Chris, you say it right. We forgive, right? I mean, but I'm not going to forget. I'm not going to forget, because as I've said since the beginning of session, this is the sophomore year of this legislative, what is it called? Class, I guess, this cohort. And this is the year they have the opportunity to show us whether they're really with us or not, because this is the year that's the farthest away from an election. Next year, they know that they're going to be knocking on people's doors, asking for money, asking for votes very soon. So I expect that they're going to behave better next year than they did this year. To me, this is the year that counts. And I'm not going to forget how these people voted. Absolutely not.
I'm not going to forget how they voted either. What we're going to try to do with LeCag, Danielle, as we've done before, we're going to start sending text blasts out to the constituents of these Rhino voters, making sure that their voters know how they voted.
That's right.
This costs money. This takes resources to do this. If you want us to make sure that we clean these rhinos out of the legislature, you got to join LeCag. You've got to join up on a monthly basis so that we have all the resources we need to make sure that voters know exactly what these Republicans have done in the legislature. That's how we beat them. So if you're frustrated, if you're angry, and you want to do something that really moves the needle and really helps, go join LeCag for the cost of a large pizza on a monthly basis. All across the state, citizens doing that will have everything we need to take care of this for you. That's all you have to do. So please do it. Please understand how important it is. And of course, Danielle, sharing the state of freedom is massively important. The line of the day, I love that. The state of freedom is not free to us, so we need your support to continue to grow and continue to expand. This is yet one of the ways that we communicate with people across the state. And Danielle, there is no other platform like ours. People know that. Share, subscribe, donate, and support the state of freedom. If there are two advocacy organizations in the state of Louisiana that you should faithfully support, it's the State of Freedom and LeCag, simply because we are uncompromising in our loyalty to you and to the Constitution, And together we can win, because losing is not an option, Danielle. Losing is not an option.
No, it's not. And please join us again on Thursday. We will continue to be live at 10 o'clock. We're on a number of platforms, but you can find us on Rumble, YouTube, X, and Facebook. Facebook, you can find us on LeCAG's Facebook and the State of Freedom's Facebook page. We will be talking on Thursday about free speech, elections, and the Secretary of State's power. We will be talking about government and the governor's consolidation of power. We'll be talking about some issues related to the Constitution, to ethics and transparency. So we will have another jam-packed episode for you on Thursday. Please join us live, or if you can't make it live, we're on all of the platforms, including the audio-only ones like Spotify and Apple Podcast.
And no, Danielle, before we sign off, I want every listener who can hear us right now to know that we love you. We love you. We believe in you. No matter what you're going through in your life, no matter how overwhelming it may feel, we love you. You are okay. And God loves you. So be good to you.
Well said, Chris. Well said.
The State of Freedom is a listener-supported podcast. We're committed to pursuing the truth about policymaking, decisions, and situations in Louisiana and at the national level that stand to impact our freedoms.
Please become a monthly supporter of the State of Freedom at freedomstate.us as we continue to expand the voice of liberty across Louisiana and beyond.
Thanks for joining us today on the State of Freedom. Be sure and check out the show notes for this episode. You can always go there and find the calls to action and resources mentioned in the show, and you can find out more information about our advertisers there as well. If you want to learn more about us or support our work, visit freedomstate.us. To get involved with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, visit lacag.org. We'll see you next time. God bless.